I'm going to talk on a subject that is challenging the most prominent scientific organization and the most prominent science magazine in the United States. And I'm going to try to make a case that they promote anti-science. I get a definition of anti-science from a book called Science and Anti-Science by Gerald Horton, a physicist from Harvard. Anti-science is a set of attitudes that involve rejection of science and the scientific method. True science requires objective collection and assessment of all evidence that is transparent and reproducible. Anti-science involves promotion of selective evidence that is not transparent and not reproducible. Now, the two entities I'm speaking about, the National Association for the Advancement of Science was formed in 1848 as the first permanent organization formed to promote the development of science and engineering at the national level. Its preeminence was not predetermined, and it came close to extinction more than once during the first 50 years. Ultimately, an alliance in 1900 with Science Magazine, which had failed as a private venture during the period of 1880 to 1899, rejuvenated both the magazine and AAAS. AAAS membership is open to anyone who shares the goal and belief that science, technology, engineering, and mathematics can help solve many of the challenges of the world faces today. There are currently about 120,000 members. I've been a member since 1976. The AAAS mission, as stated on their website, advance science, engineering, and innovation throughout the world for the benefit of all. They have four specific goals: advance scientific excellence and achievement, foster equity and inclusion for scientific excellence, build trust among scientists and communities. I dispute their claim that they're a valued source of accurate scientific information. And four, catalyze progress where science meets policy. And I dispute their notion that their actionable evidence for public policy is correct. On their website, they show funders. They are recipient of substantial funding from the federal government, including grants, contracts, and cooperative agreements. I've just selected a few here: Department of Health and Human Services, EPA, Department of Energy, and several foundations like Gates, Hewlett-Packard, Rockefeller, and so forth. Many of these are very liberal sources of funding. Based on their latest IRS Form 990, their Chief Executive Officer, Sidhu Parikh, has a total compensation of approximately $1 million. Their Editor-in-Chief of Science, Holden Thorpe, approximately $700,000. These are quite well-paid jobs for two scientists. Their net assets are approximately $125 million, and membership dues account for only about 1% of that. Now, I have searched out some independent assessments of AAAS and science. You often don't find these on Google searches. Their more reliable searches are Bing or Yahoo. Sometimes you have to dig hard to find some of this. This is a 2015 conversation article by Matthew Nesbitt, a professor at Northeastern University, inside America's climate lobby. What motivates AAAS members to engage the public? And it finds information based on a 2009 Pew Research Center survey, and concludes, on the whole, AAAS members are strongly left-leaning and politically like-minded. In 2009, more than half self-identified as either liberal or very liberal, only roughly a third is moderate, and just 9% is conservative. AAAS membership also has a strong partisan political skew, with 55% Democrat, 32% independent, and only 6% is Republican. In comparison with other social groups, which Pew has data, AAAS members rank among the most like-minded. Then there's a 2017 Influence Watch analysis of AAAS. AAAS has been accused of promoting a broadly left-leaning policy agenda and associating with front groups for the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Many of its leaders have also been criticized for supporting environmentalist policies. Since the 1920s, AAAS has been associated with a number of Soviet-aligned groups and radical far-left organizations, some of whose leaders have also been officers in AAAS. In the modern era, AAAS has become more involved in promoting a left-wing science activism, ideological activism performed in the guise of promoting science. Its involvement in the March for Science, which was organized in opposition to the election and policies of President Trump in 2017, is an indication of its political bias. We will see if they make any pronouncements during the next 4 months. This is another indication. This is direct writings that deal with complaints about President Trump in 2020. There's a Wired article by Adam Rogers, America's top science journal has had it with Trump. And then there's specific editorials written by Thorpe that, again, one particular that I picked out is an attack on the proposed, this is the Trump's EPA transparency and regulatory science rule that was eventually defeated or never adopted, requiring transparency and reproducibility in studies used by EPA. Reproducibility and transparency are essential elements of the scientific method. And then there's an editorial written in September of 2020 by Thorpe, Trump lied about science. And this is an attack on President Trump and his advisor, Dr. Scott Atlas, for challenging the 2020 US COVID-19 policies, which have now been shown to be very flawed. And then there's a news item, weathering the storm, disastrous, damaging, catastrophic. These are just some of the more polite terms that many US scientists use to describe the policies of President Donald Trump. This is an article in the National Association of Scholars from 2015 that I helped put together, and this involved our interaction with the then science editor, Marcia McNutt, and it involved their ability to criticize anthropogenic global warming, linear no threshold, and PM 2.5 deaths. As you know, Marcia McNutt is now the president of the National Academy of Sciences. So the issue regarding anthropogenic global warming, which we now refer to as climate change, has been promoted as an urgent problem. And there was a 2015 science article by Carl, who was mentioned by Dr. Klauser, yet the criticism, this article, was not allowed when submissions were made. And I believe Fred Singer was one of those that submitted criticism of this article. Regarding the linear no threshold dose response model, this has been consistently promoted as valid by science. And there is a critical article all the way back June 29th of 1956 titled Genetic Effects of Atomic Radiation that was used as a critical factor in adoption of the linear no threshold model, and no criticism is allowed of that article. And finally, there's a claim of fine particulate matter causing death. This is one that I've been involved with now for 20 years. This claim is used to justify a lot of EPA regulations because of the extreme costs associated with deaths, if they were real. And again, no criticism is allowed. Now, I just list some of the resources that are on the AAAS website regarding climate change, how we respond, communities and science taking action on climate change, the reality, risks, and response to climate change, and they state the the obvious standard line, the overwhelming evidence of human-caused climate change documents both current impacts with significant costs and extraordinary future risks to society and natural systems. They also quote the standard line: about 97% of climate experts have concluded that human-caused climate change is happening, and they have a What We Know website to give more details on this. And they this is how they ignore strong evidence of no climate crisis and do not publish findings of the climate skeptics. I've just put here, there's no mention of two recent books that are skeptical of climate change. Unsettled, What Climate Science Tells Us, Doesn't Tell Us, and Why It Matters, by Stephen Koonin. This was mentioned by Dr. Klauser. Stephen Koonin is a brilliant physicist and put together a brilliant book. No mention of it or no publications by Koonin in Science. Another one that just came out this year, Climate and Energy, The Case for Realism, edited by Calvin Beisner and David Legates. This book includes chapters by several people that have spoken to this meeting. And again, no book review, no publications by the authors that are cited in this book. Instead, what science does is they attack climate skeptics. And I refer back to a February of 2015 article Smithsonian asks legal watchdog to investigate climate skeptics' disclosure practices. This involves a scientist at this meeting. I'm not going to name him, but these kind of personal attacks do damage to people's reputation in an unjustified way. And it's irresponsible for science to do this kind of smear-mongering. Now I switch to the issue of the linear no-threshold dose-response model and how it ignores contrary evidence. The one specific article that I'm going to cite here occurred in October of 2018. It was a Senate hearing. The title of the article is "A Little Radiation Good for You?" And it actually involved two prominent people. And this is the notion. People are constantly exposed to low doses of radiation, but how these low doses affect health and risk of disease is not well understood. As a result, regulations often support a precautionary principle. One of the witnesses there is Edward Calabrese, who's probably the leading authority on hormesis and criticism of linear no threshold. And he stated during this hearing that the EPA's approach to dose response is based on shoddy evidence. Another witness at this hearing was the then CEO of AAAS, Rush Holt, who was critical of the EPA's transparency proposal. And Holt didn't think that this proposal would even lead to a better acceptance of the notion of hormesis. And this is basically consistent with the AAAS policy opposing this rule, the proposed Strengthening Transparency in Regulatory Science rule. They wrote a very strong letter to EPA opposing this rule back in 2018. Now I want to cite two articles by Edward Calabrese that deal with his interactions with science. The first is he identified 4 articles that he believes have resulted in the acceptance of linear no threshold. As it says here, the acceptance of the linear no threshold dose response model was unethically advocated and advanced both by scientists within the radiation genetics community and by editorial practices in science. The first is a article by Muller, Nobel laureate, Artificial Transmutation of the Gene, published in Science in 1927. And this article contains no data, but it's considered an important article. Then this article was supported by a 1949 article by Uphoff and Stern, and this used unreviewed data. Third is the critical paper that I mentioned earlier, the Beer Genetics Panel, Genetic Effects of Atomic Radiation in Science, June 29th, 1956. And this, again, based on Ed Calabrese's analysis, is what was done unethically to claim the validity of LNT. And fourth is a article by Lewis, Leukemia and Ionizing Radiation, published in Science in 1957. This is one where a geneticist, Lewis was a geneticist, misused radiation epidemiology. And what I've done to try to test science's willingness to accept any kind of criticism, they have a procedure for electronic letters. I submitted electronic letters pointing out what Calabrese had written in his paper. This LNT gate paper came out 2 years ago. All the electronic letters were ignored. There haven't been no postings on any of these papers of electronic letters. This is a second article that Ed Calabrese wrote regarding misconduct in science editorial decisions, and it's entitled "Societal Threats from Ideological Driven Science." And again, it refers to the biological effects of atomic radiation genetics panel in 1955 that announced the switch to linearity in the June 29, 1956 Science article. And what Ed Calabrese revealed is that the journal played a role in the way they dealt with this subject. In fact, there were letters submitted by Calabrese and Cutler asking for retractions or corrections of this 1956 Science article. All of this was rejected by editor McNutt. Now, this goes into my area of expertise, which is on fine particulate matter, PM 2.5 deaths. This is an issue that's been controversial for 30 years, since 1993, and it's been used to justify a very important EPA finding called the fine particulate matter and national ambient air quality standard. And I submitted, after I did an analysis, I've talked about this previously, I did an analysis that got published in 2017, which was a reanalysis of the seminal paper that was from 1995 that justified the establishment of the PM 2.5 NAAQS. I submitted this manuscript on July 5th of 2016. It was rejected 3 days later, July 8th, by a deputy editor who had expertise in ecology and anthropology and was based in the United Kingdom. So they didn't even make an effort to have an epidemiologist examine my paper. And they thanked me for submitting it, said it didn't receive high enough priority to even undergo initial screening and or an in-depth review. And they recommended I submit it to a more specialized journal. I went through the same process a couple weeks later with their Science Advances journal that rejected my reanalysis, again, without any in-depth review. It was published in March of 2017 in the journal Dose Response. And I wanted to now show that the hypocrisy of the magazine regarding this issue. So knowing that this has been controversial, they even wrote a very detailed article about the controversy back in 1997. They went ahead 4 years after rejecting mine, they published this article evaluating the impact of long-term exposure to fine particulate matter on mortality among the elderly by a group of non-epidemiologists at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And this Science Advances article, I believe, is the first one on environmental epidemiology that was published. They had generally for decades avoided epidemiology because they didn't consider it a hard science. But this has changed in recent years. And so in order to do this particular study, there has to be they used Medicare data on 69 million Americans, and this, including, I'm sure, most of the people in this room, and without providing access to this data as required by their science policy. So they just in numerous ways they violated their own policy, and I go into this, and I filed in early 2022 misconduct allegations against two of the authors. The primary author is Francesca Dominici. The lead author on that particular paper was a Chinese now PhD scientist, Zhao Wu. And these are a couple of the points that I had listed, 9 points. One is that they consistently falsify the research record regarding evidence that there are no PM 2.5 deaths. They simply ignore findings that contradict their own. They also ignore an analysis that was done by a prominent statistician, Richard Smith, in 2021, showing by his analysis that there are no PM 2.5 deaths among the Medicare patients below the current standard of 12 micrograms per cubic meter. Also, they ignore the fact that the levels in the United States, based on prior regulations that have existed since 1997, make it impossible to effectively lower the already low levels. They also misuse Medicare records to make causal conclusions. This is called ecological epidemiology, where the Medicare records, of course, don't contain any information about lifestyle characteristics or actual exposure to air pollution. So they impute these values on a geographical basis, which is reduces the accuracy and reliability of the studies to virtually zero. But they still go ahead and do this. And also, they obtain no informed consent from the 69 million Medicare record people. These are HIPAA protected, but they found a way to access this data. Usually the access is granted for analysis of what the use patterns are for Medicare, and so you can get an idea of the burdens and costs and so forth of Medicare. It's not designed for air pollution epidemiology, but they managed to work the system and misuse these records without anyone really approving it or in many cases even knowing about it. Now, this is an exchange. I've had many exchanges with the current editor-in-chief, Holden Thorpe. He has got to the point where he decided he couldn't take it anymore, so he actually talked with me for 20 minutes on April 1st of 2022, and I was discussing with him the importance of the EPA transparency rule and requesting that they allow me to publish something either in the form of my own opinion piece called a policy forum, or a letter, or even just an electronic letter. So he went and discussed this with the other editors, and on April 18th, they decided, and this is in his email message to me, we have decided not to do anything further on this. I know this is not the answer you hoped for, but at least you got a response. I realize you may state publicly that we will not engage. So that's the way they deal with science, okay? Now, just a few months after that exchange, they then publish in Science Advances another article on PM 2.5 deaths. How low can you go? air pollution affects mortality at very low levels. This was done by 17 Canadian authors using Canadian data. No connection with anything in the United States. And they find, by their analysis, levels that are incredibly low. In fact, it's hard to believe that they find this. I've been battling several of these Canadian investigators going back over 15 years. And I put no, well, it's really not relevant to the United States, but the fact that they were finding effects at very low levels, I guess, pleased the science editors. And then, of course, they conclude with the sentence, a need for continued reductions in outdoor air pollution around the world. So they're dedicated to this approach. Then, this is the article I want to focus the most on. This is an article that is was published November 24th in last year on deaths, PM 2.5 deaths due to coal. The lead author was Henneman of George Mason University and included the Francesca Dominici of Harvard Chan, and she's the one that the mastermind on the use of Medicare data. And here in the abstract, they attribute a total of 460,000 deaths to coal particulate matter, and then contend that their findings have implications for current air pollution risk assessments. No citation of any of the contradictory evidence. And then here, this is what I consider even more unethical, how they then amplified these, the findings in this paper. First of all, on the cover of Science magazine, they highlighted this article. On the top center, they put the words, excess deaths caused by coal. The use of the word caused was not anywhere in the paper itself. They used things like attributed or associated, but that didn't stop the editor from putting cause on the front cover. They also had a two-page editorial that they labeled epidemiology by two environmental engineers who have no training in epidemiology. And again, the editorial was very supportive of the article, measuring the impacts of air pollution and assuming that the information in the article is correct. Then they also, both George Mason University and Harvard put out very glowing press releases. And they got the New York Times to write an article, deaths from coal pollution have dropped, but emissions may be twice as deadly. Again, no criticism or no qualifications of what's in the article. So I immediately filed a complaint with both George Mason University with their research integrity officer, and I submitted an electronic letter to Science. The letter was submitted the week after the publication, but nothing happened. And then I learned a couple months later that when you allege scientific misconduct in Science, you're supposed to send an email to AAAS, and that's what I did on March 5th. And so I detailed all the criticism that some of which I've described earlier. Mainly the my allegation involves falsification of the research record, misuse of HIPAA-protected Medicare data, violation of epidemiologic standards, such as getting permission from subjects when they are enrolled in epidemiologic studies, and numerous other factors. And I've posted these things on my Scientific Integrity Institute website. So what happened from March 5th to March 11th, 6 days later, AAAS itself did not investigate this. I get back a letter from, an email letter from Editor Thorpe dismissing my allegations. He writes, Dr. Enstrom, I'm of course very familiar with your disagreements about PM 2.5 epidemiology. We have responded to your concerns multiple times over the years. We will be doing nothing further on this matter at this time. Well, of course, they've never responded. They've just dismissed all my, or ignored. They either dismissed or ignored my earlier complaints. And in an effort to be fair-minded, I believe in being fair-minded. I actually have written and called Editor Thorpe. When we talked, he gave me his personal cell number. I called that number. I told him that I would be willing to allow him to make comments at the end of my talk in any form he wanted. Of course, he didn't respond to that offer. Now, I also went back to in my effort to try to test who's got some concern or credibility on this. I went back to the dissertation committee of Henneman. This was at Georgia Institute of Technology, Georgia Tech. The committee chair he had is very prominent in this area of PM 2.5 epidemiology, named Armistead Russell. He's served on the EPA KSAC committee and on other national committee chairs. I thought possibly that at least one of these committee members would at least get back to me. No, none of them did. And then I've also sent an email to the provost of George Mason University, in addition to the research integrity officer. Turns out the provost is also a professor in the civil engineering department of Henneman. So this, I thought, was an amazing opportunity for something. And again, no response from the provost. The next thing, concurrently with these different email submissions, I had a private party in Virginia who knows how to do Freedom of Information requests in Virginia, file one on behalf of me for this Henneman article in Science. And I got back 42 redacted records that started 3 months after the article was submitted. The article was submitted to Science in October of it was October of 22, and it was published in November of 23. But these 42 redacted records didn't include the first 3 months of the submission. There were no records on the original or revised manuscripts, none of the 4 peer reviews that were given, no author responses to the peer reviews, nothing addressing the human subjects protection issue regarding Medicare records. When it was finally accepted on October 2nd of 2023, there was an exchange between the lead author Henneman and Francesca Dominici, the senior author. So what they're talking about is the policy implications of this paper, as if there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And then Dominici says to Henneman, Lucas, this paper will give you tenure. So this is the way things operate, and that's basically all I could get out of that part of the redacted records. I did also get some information regarding the access to Medicare data. This involved their article editor named Carolyn Ash. She has a degree in microbiology from the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom. Again, they did not find an editor with any expertise in epidemiology or one based in the United States. So this is the level of review that they give to an article like this. And Ash repeats in many ways that the data must be freely available, and then they go through some exchanges. Finally, she says, your data statements in the acknowledgement look generally fine to me. But then when you go to the acknowledgements in the published paper, you find it says Medicare data sets in accordance with the data use agreement must be acquired from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. This is a process that's almost impossible to go through, and so the data is not available according to, as per the science policy. Then I sort of, in reading the article in detail, I find that it was funded. I'm trying to figure out why no action is taken. I file complaints with the research integrity officer, the department chair, and the provost at George Mason University, the dissertation committee of Henneman, with NIH and with science, and no actions taken. And then I realized this project was funded with 14 research grants, most of which came from NIH. So I'd say part of the conclusion is that the 14 research grants are more important than anything to dealing with the integrity of the article that's published. Now, I've reached out to a number of additional people. Now, this is a person that is particularly relevant, named Richard Meserve. He has a PhD in applied physics and a law degree from Harvard. A very accomplished gentleman who served as the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and as a partner in a major DC law firm. But his most important role at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, is he's chairman of the board of the Health Effects Institute, which assesses the health effects of air pollution. He rejected my request 2 years ago to investigate evidence that my reanalysis contradicted what they had done back in the period of around 2000 regarding their assessment of this paper. He declined my request then. The most recent request that I made in May of this year involved both my PM 2.5 concerns, but also his involvement with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is obviously relevant to the linear no threshold policy, because there have been many efforts to get the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to admit there's a threshold on the health effects of radiation. But again, he gave me a response. At least he was professional enough to give me a response. No need to investigate was his response. Another relevant person, highly relevant, is the incoming president of the AAAS, Teresa Maldonado, PhD. She's the University of California Office of the President, Vice President for Research and Innovation. And I wrote to her in May and asked her if she would look at any of this, as it's all highly relevant to AAAS. And I note that she, in reading her agenda for the University of California, she is one of the key leaders of what's called the California Climate Action Initiative, which is, again, millions or billions of dollars devoted to the climate alarmism that exists in California and at the University of California in particular. She did not respond at all to me. So the final insult occurred in April of this year. After we'd gone through, I've made all these complaints, and Thorpe rejected me in March. This is an article called A Science Perspective under the category of epidemiology, assessing the health burden from air pollution. This is written by two Europeans, one from Denmark, one from Germany. I know the one from Germany particularly well. These are activists who are connected with the Health Effects Institute. So here's a couple sentences from this perspective. Human health is affected by air pollution, causing, and they use the word causing, cardiometabolic, respiratory, and neurological disease, and increased mortality. Hence, while maintaining focus on the highest polluted areas, the very real effects of air pollution in low exposure areas should be addressed with equivalent commitment. Now, this is outrageous. The levels in China, India, and Africa are in the order of 10 times what they are in the United States. You can't realistically lower the levels anymore in the United States because of air diffusion. And yet, this is what they want to emphasize this in a U.S. journal because they want to keep the pressure on the United States. They're not directing this to China or to Africa or India. But then they always have to include the obligatory photograph of Los Angeles. And this was taken in February of 2023. It's the haze in Los Angeles is due to the inversion layer from the San Gabriel Mountains. And it's not harmful. There will never be perfectly clear. On some days it's clear, especially after rain. But this is nothing like the air pollution that existed when Dr. Clauser was attending Caltech 60-some years ago. And so, but this is the kind of distortion that they put out. So my conclusions, I believe from several independent sources that science, AAAS and Science Magazine have a strong liberal political bias that dates back 100 years. I believe it's worse now than it was in that Pew survey of 15 years ago. And I've provided evidence they're biased in 3 important policy-related areas. They promote human-caused climate change, the linear no-threshold dose-response model, and deaths caused by air pollution. They suppress contrary evidence in all 3 of these contentious issues, and they refused to attempt resolution of conflicting evidence using the scientific method. The editor, Thorpe, has declined my offers to engage in a dialogue, and most of the relevant scientists that I've discussed today have not responded at all. So the validity of my evidence has not been disputed, at least by these people, and they're the most relevant ones to dispute it. Thus, I conclude that AAAS and Science Magazine promote anti-science. And that's basically my talk.
Thank you, Professor. We do have a few minutes for questions. We do have a Zoom attendee who would like to ask a question. I think this will work.
Jim, thank you very much for a great talk. I am Catherine Kelly. I'm a toxicologist at North Shore Lake Tahoe and new member of DDP. I just wanted to share that 3 months ago, I was offered the chance to do a deep dive on PM 2.5 and assess the extent to which PM 2.5 causes adverse health effects, not whether it does, but to the extent to which, because after all, there have been almost $50 million paid only to Harvard, only for a 16-year period on the subject of PM 2.5, and many millions of dollars in Harvard can't be wrong, right? Well, come to realize that all the work of Jim Enstrom and Stan Young and Warren Kindersky, Ed Calabrese, Tony Cox, unbelievable how you could have long since left all this behind and enjoyed retirement, but you are out there with your great science and strength of character to keep putting it on the map for those of us trying to sort out this mess. And we stand on the shoulders of some very tall giants. So thank you. This is just a chance to thank you, Jim, and a lot of your colleagues for continuing to do the good work that you're doing, because you are spot on, as they say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the time and effort.
I'm curious whether your organization is looking at Ed Dowd's work on the unusual deaths following the COVID vaccines. Do you know about that?
That is a different line. I have, but look at there. That needs to be looked into. But I've stuck just primarily with the air pollution-related deaths.
Good work, Jim.
Thank you.
In 1948, when I was 8 years old, we moved to California, and I lived in LA in South Central for about a year. I learned about the early Indians. They were called the Yangna Indians, and some of the early writings of the Spanish described, as they approached the area, the low-level smog and haze existent in the area at that time.
One quick comment in defense of science. I mentioned Trenberth and Vasulo 2010. They were the first and strongest whistleblowers who were anti-climate change. So they're not. So science is not all pro-climate change.
No, I didn't mean to make it completely sweeping. It's just that in many ways they've gone off track. But I'm not going to make a generalization that everything is incorrect.